very warm welcome to OBN Horn of Africa. This is our weekly program, Talk to OBN. In this edition, we'll be discussing about the 47th ordinary sessions of the African Union's Permanent Representative Committee's session, which is being undergone starting from 15 to 26 January 2024, as well as the upcoming 44th ordinary session of Executive Councils and 37th Head of States and Head of Government Assembly in African Union. To discuss this matter, I am joining by Kabala John, Head of Communication for African Continental Unity Party. Kabala, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, sir. Glad to be here.
Before just diving to our discussion, I need you to tell us a bit about the African Continental Unity Party.
Perfect. Yes, African Continental Unity Party, it's an emerging force by people's initiative, literally by Africans' initiative, whereby we have realized for a long time that in all the problems that we are facing in Africa today, we can only look at those problems in two perspectives. It means one perspective, which is the elite perspective, and another perspective, which is the masses or the people's perspective. Now, for a long time now, the African masses, have been relying on the elite's perspective to find the solution to the African problem, but it looks like we don't get the results that we want. So time is now to make sure that the people's initiatives or the people's perspectives is also counted for the rest of the 21st century. So literally, that's what ACUP is, the African Continental Unity Party. It is the voice of the people who are coming together now by looking at the African Union as the only union or the unity of African head of states. It doesn't help us as the masses of Africa to unite. We are coming up with alternative to allow ourselves to be united politically, economically, and scientifically, and otherwise, culturally, just to make sure that African integration that we have been talking for a long time is now a reality that we are pursuing to achieve before the end of the 21st century.
The 47th ordinary session of the African Union Permanent Representative Committee is being undergone in Ethiopia, the headquarters of African Union. What is the main objective of this session?
Well, according to what they have announced, the main objective of the session is about education. It's about how to educate the African child fit for the 21st century, or in other words, the African child fit for the challenges that Africa is facing in this 21st century. It is an exciting topic which they've come up with. We just hope that out of the preparations that they are busy doing for eventually for the Executive Council and eventually the General Assembly, we hope after all these three meetings, we can come up with a blueprint, a realistic blueprint to allow African children to go through proper education and to be utilized in Africa for the African development.
The session is being undergone and the team educates an African fit for the 21st century. What does it mean by?
Well, as I said earlier on, it's all about preparing the African child to be fit to handle the challenges of Africa in the 21st century. Africa is totally free, and Africans are the masters or are in the driving seat of their own destiny. So from that moment, the second challenge is how to then integrate the African development with the new technological advancement that we see in the world today, because whoever controls technology in the 21st century and over will be in position to control the world. So I think those are the challenges that we need to deal with. And the education in Africa definitely need to deal with these fundamental two challenges that we are facing today as African children. But I think also the most important challenge that not just facing the African child, but is facing African head of states, African leaders at the moment, is to make sure that whatever education that we provide for African children, opportunities need to be also associated with that education. Because when you see the reality today in Africa is that we have education plans and programs, but we don't have plans to create opportunities for the people we are educating. As a result, these kids out of school or universities, they look to the west, they look to the east to go and hunt the green patches there, and which creates the brain drain in Africa. It's loss of brain, loss of talents, loss of skills that we need to build Africa. And then we are left with the dancers, TikTokers, and the people who are not productive to the agenda of African liberation. So I think talking about education, educating African child is fundamental, but also providing the means, the possibilities for the African child to be able to find opportunities in Africa so that he can stay in Africa and use his talents and skills to build Africa is the most important thing, I guess.
Well, in his opening remark, Chairperson of African Union Commission, Musa Faki Mohammed, stressed the need for more investment in education. This is going to be the mandate of African Union. In what way should this intervention could be entertained in reality, though?
Well, it's a difficult one because firstly, there are a lot of policies drafted or developed from the African Union's level, but the implementation of those policies have always been a problem. We can talk about the peace policies, we can talk about single passport policies, all those things. So it will be the same as education. It's good. I mean, the wish, the policy, and everything discussed there is important, but at the level of implementation, it's going to be a bit of difficulty there, since we don't have political integration, first of all, because when you have political integration, it becomes easier for you to have educational integration and as well as economic integration. So what is missing now, I think, to get those policies or to get the investment, education investment, effectively achieved is to have a political integration in Africa, not just regional, but really continental integration. From the moment that we have political integration, it's going to be easier to draft this kind of policies in education and implement them easily across Africa. Because now what's going to happen is in many countries in Africa, there are those who have adopted education philosophy to becoming like French. Others have adopted education orientation to becoming like England. Others want to educate their children to becoming like the United States or, for example, China. Now we have diversity in our approach toward education. Now, when we talk about investing heavily into education, do we have a global, a collective approach, or do we just want to pour the money into African countries that are pursuing different orientation in terms of education? Others want to turn their children into into little British. Others want to turn their children into little French, Portuguese, so forth and so on. So I think we need political integration, because political integration gives us an ideology, common ideology. From the moment that we have a common ideology, we will be having an easy to invest into education, knowing exactly that we are going to produce this type of leaders through our education and through the investment that we are putting in the education. But for now, well, we can invest, but if we don't correct our ideology, right? If we don't come up with a political integration to allow us to have common ideology, then we'll produce, with this investment, leaders who are just inclined to follow European or Western agenda rather than the African agenda.
In addition to this education investment, this permanent representative committee is expected to discuss on this continental peace and regional integration as well. What will be the possible resolution of this committee in this continental peace and regional integration, though?
I think the first thing that we need to look into as Africa is, I think it's going to be the military integration. For as far as the peace plan is concerned, because what is happening today in Africa, in most cases, when there's a war, you will always find that the Western is sitting behind the curtains and maneuvering things to have war continuing in Sudan, in the Congo, in West Africa, in those countries. The worst supply weapons, the worst sponsor those warlords and stuff like that to have a situation of war continuing in Africa. So if we want to talk about the peace, a sustainable peace in Africa, we should be looking first and foremost about military integration in Africa. That means we need to create a continental army. I don't know if this is part of the African Union's agenda, but I've never heard it. But I think we need to come up with a continental army instead of talking about peace without having a long-term goal with that peace. Because what is happening now is it's all about theory, but we don't see practically effort being developed and eventually the willingness from the head of states to come together and build a collective defense system for Africa. So that's what we need. And once we have that, I think peace will be really the matter of the past, and really, as far as Africa among ourselves, we are concerned.
Well, silencing the gun was one of the themes which has been told repeatedly over the past assemblies of African Union. Do you see, an act of silencing the gun in Africa, especially in the Sahel region and other parts of Africa these days? If not, those themes of discussion by African Union were not successful, isn't it?
Yeah, of course, it was not successful. Silencing guns is a theory and good rhetoric, but there's no efforts substantially that is being developed to end the wars and to silence guns in Africa. That's what I said before. We have the Westerners sitting behind the curtains and maneuvering things in Africa to have war continuing in Africa, so that we can always feel like we need them to come and help us to find peace. So if we need to silence gun, we have to go with the more radical approach of integrating our armies in creating the African Continental Army instead of these individual armies, because it's what actually favor the wars that we have in Africa. If we have one army, it's going to be difficult to have war breaking here and there as we have it in Africa today.
The other thing that has been discussed by African Union head of states and head of governments session last year was the way how to halt unconstitutional change of government in the Sahel region. We can mention the case in the coup attempt in Gabon, Niger, Mali, Burkina, Gambia, and Equatorial Guinea, among others. They have delivered ways in which this unconstitutional change of government should be halted, but still ongoing. What's your take away on those remarks of the head of state and head of government's deliberation last year and the ongoing unconstitutional changes of government in the Sahel region?
I think this change of whatever policies that is being discussed by the head of states in terms of constitutional change should also include the measures or the punishment that can be put in place whenever a leader undemocratically captures the power or continues to be in power against the will of his people. We need to see more actions in that manner, because we have those cases all over the continent. We have people who have been into power for decades. It looks like they are the only ones who have intelligence and wisdom, and the young people are excluded from the power center of our countries. So this is undemocratic, and this is a coup d'etat, definitely, because the majority of the people in these countries, they don't agree with that. But what are they doing, the head of states? So in other words, we are looking at the African Union today as a unity of head of states to protect and defend themselves and their own interest at the expense of African people. So if there's any change that will be appreciated by people, should be that change that includes also some measures that will be taken against those leaders who change constitution, who remain in power against the will of the people, because that is undemocratic. And that's what we want to see. And that's something that we can appreciate in terms of the coup d'etat and other stuff that are happening in Africa. And mind you, the situation of coup d'etat might continue because we are at that stage where people cannot just handle it anymore. When you look at the suffering of the people in Africa, when you look at the precarity, look at the conditions, mostly those conditions facilitated by the corruption, the level of leadership and mismanagement of the resources. Well, people will have at some point, soon or later, take it up on themselves to change things the way that it fits the vision of the people. That's why I spoke earlier on about the people's perspective against the elite perspective. We are now at the age of the perspective of the masses. It means whatever that the elites in Africa do not do for us, we, the African masses, will move in to do it for ourselves. Sometimes we can do it violently or peacefully. It depends on what kind of opposition we will be having, we'll have to face on the other side of those who have the power in Africa and who are working for the Western interest.
Well, the 44th Executive Council's session and 37th Head of States and Head of Government Assembly will be held in coming February. Africa has a lot on its plate that needs a very quick response and action. Among others, the conflict in Sudan that is being undergone between Hemeti and Al-Burhan. What should we expect from the upcoming summit in connection with stopping the ongoing conflict in Sudan?
The African Union need to really intervene in Sudan by all means necessary to silence guns and put those leaders together to find a solution that can accommodate all of them in order to bring peace in Sudan and then stop the killing of the people and then displacement of many who are now fleeing their homes. In the process, education of children is disrupted, hunger, malnutrition, diseases, all those things follow. So we want to see two types of solutions, long-term as well as short-term solutions on that area. And apart from silencing gun, we want to see the 37 Assembly and 44 Executive Committee discussing about hunger situation, what we saw last year, whereby African leaders going to beg for grains in Russia is disgusting. If we know that we have, when we know that we have 60% of arable land in the world, I think African leaders in these assemblies must come up with the resolutions to not just combat hunger, but to eliminate hunger, because we have the means and possibility to do that. I think what we are lacking now is just the will and commitment to get it done. So we want to see them eventually coming up with the policies and strategies to combat hunger. And I want to see also them coming up with the strategies and policies to bring more technological advancement in Africa, which is really driving the world's economy today.
Okay, comparatively speaking, among the very optimistic ambition of African Union, the African Continental Free Trade Area is somehow promising and undergoing relatively well. Do you buy this argument?
I feel like for the African Continental Free Trade to work better, there need to be production capacity in Africa. You see, because when you talk about trade, you need to be firstly producing what you need to trade. Now, if we talk about the trading raw materials, natural resources, that is not a trade that will develop Africa. Now, when you look at the capacity of production in the Congo, it's lacking. When you look in Uganda, it's lacking. When you look in Kenya, all these African countries, we don't produce most of what we need. It's maybe only South Africa where you have the industry of production, which it's also really shaking and trembling, but it's still there somewhere, somehow. But in the rest of Africa, it doesn't. Now, what's going to happen with African Continental Free Trade? Because the capacity of production, industrial production, manufacturing sector is still low in Africa. So I think for African Continental Free Trade to work perfectly, we need to also build the capacity of production in Africa, our manufacturing industry, steel industry. All these things need to be working so that we have something that we can bring, and share among ourselves and the trade. Otherwise, it's just a good policy, which I call symbol, but which does not have substance. And we are experts in having symbols which do not have substance in Africa. I think that needs to change if you are serious about economic development.
Well, let's talk about BRICS Plus. Again, we expect deliberations and resolutions, as well as discussion of implementations of this BRICS Plus. And your Continental Unity Party, African Continental Unity Party, is planning to have a Continental March, right? Tell us about it. Tell us about it in conjunction with the formation of BRICS and your ambition as well.
Well, I think March, we are preparing to have a march, peaceful march in April this year, 2024, across Africa to demand for single currency. It even responds to the need of African continental free trade, because what is happening in Africa now is that if I have to trade with another country, I need to go, or all of us need to go to America and borrow the dollars or euros in Europe, of course, to come and trade among ourselves, and the interest to go to the one who prints the money, right? So what is so difficult for us to have our own currency to trade among ourselves and cut the middleman and have all the benefits of that trade returning to Africa? So that's what we are looking into. It's going to be easier. When you talk about free trade in Africa, when you talk about free trade, continental free trade, you need to talk about currency of that trade, which we don't have. So we are going to march in support, of course, of all these beautiful ideas, such as African continental free trade. We are going to march to ask and demand for our leaders currently to think and to come up with the policy and execute that policy for the single currency in Africa, and to cut the middleman. That's what we are going to do in April this year. Now, talking about BRICS Plus, well, BRICS is an interesting development that is taking place in the world today. But I think as a Pan-Africanist, we have our reservations, because we believe that anything that needs to be done for any oppressed person needs to be done by that single oppressed person. In other words, the only institution that can speak for, honestly, speak for the interest of African people is only that institution that African people build for themselves. Now, mostly, as I said, we like to belong to certain things because we like more of symbols which do not have substance.
On 2 consecutive assemblies of African Union last year and before last year, Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Dr. Abiy Ahmed, has forwarded his remark by underscoring that Africa needs a permanent representation in the United Nations Security Council. How do you see this, and what does it mean?
Of course, it's a noble call. It's something that many Africans have been talking about for a long time. Africans, we are 54 states as we're speaking right now. Among the 194 countries in the world, 54 states, we are the majority, but we don't have a representation at the United Nations General Assembly. So this just shows you the structure of the world in which we are living in. So the Prime Minister Abiy is definitely right to ask for Africa to have a permanent representation at the General Assembly and also have the veto rights at the General Assembly of UN, because we cannot be vetoed all the time and we don't have the right to veto others, even though we are the majority. It doesn't work like that. In a just world, it doesn't work like that.
Kabala John, Head of Communication Strategy for African Continental Unity Party, thank you for your expertise and invaluable insights about African affairs.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity. Looking forward.
Wow. Okay, dear viewers, this brings you the end of our edition for today. See you next time with another edition. Bye-bye. Have a good one.